A poor mechanic, a mysterious woman, a chance encounter that changes everything. When Caleb Reed, a hard-working small-town mechanic, stops to help a stranded driver on the side of the road, he has no idea she's actually Madeleine Sinclair, the powerful CEO of one of the biggest automotive companies in the country. He fixes her car, refuses her money, and sends her on her way, thinking he'll never see her again. But Madeleine isn't just any woman. She's searching for something money can't buy, honesty. And Caleb, he might just be the one man who can show her what truly matters. Will love be enough when two worlds collide? Or will the weight of their differences tear them apart? Stick around, because this is a story of love, trust, and taking the biggest risk of all, following your heart. If you love romantic, heartwarming stories with deep emotions and unforgettable characters, make sure to subscribe to Shadows to Stars so you never miss a great story like this. Turn on notifications and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Now let's dive into the story. Poor mechanic repairs a girl's car, unaware. She's a secret billionaire, looking for an honest. When the summer sun had begun its slow descent, casting an amber glow over the quiet town of Maplewood. The hum of cicadas filled the warm air, blending with the distant murmur of traffic. Inside Harrison's auto repair, the scent of motor oil and metal hung thick. The familiar symphony of clanking tools and whirring drills, creating a rhythm that felt like home. Caleb Reed wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his grease-stained hand. Another long day, another string of repairs. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was the guy people counted on. The one who got a single mom's car running again when her paycheck was tight. The one who fixed old man Jenkins' truck for free because he knew the man would rather starve than ask for charity. Helping people wasn't just something he did. It was who he was. So when the sleek midnight blue sports car rolled up to the garage, hood steaming like an overheated kettle, Caleb barely hesitated before reaching for his rag. Luxury cars were a rare sight in Maplewood. Most folks drove pickups or practical sedans. But this was a Sinclair Phantom, a car so exclusive that only a handful existed in the entire country. And stepping out from the driver's seat was a woman who looked like she belonged anywhere but here. She was elegance wrapped in a storm, with piercing green eyes, long chestnut-brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and a crisp white blouse, now slightly wrinkled from the heat. But despite her refined appearance, there was something human about her. She wasn't clutching her phone, barking orders, or acting impatient. Instead, she frowned at the smoking hood, biting her lower lip, looking genuinely frustrated. Caleb approached, wiping his hands on his work jeans. "Looks like your radiator's throwing a fit." The woman turned to him, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Yeah, I noticed." Her voice was smooth, cultured, but there was no arrogance in it. If anything, she sounded tired. "You're lucky it happened here," Caleb said, crouching to take a closer look at the front grille. "Few more miles, and you would have been stranded on the highway." The woman sighed. "That would have made my already disastrous day even worse." Caleb glanced up, his curiosity piqued. "Bad day, huh?" She let out a humorless chuckle. "You have no idea." Caleb didn't push. He never did. Instead, he tapped the car's fender lightly. "Pop the hood. Let's see what we're dealing with." She hesitated for a moment, then reached into the car and pulled the lever. A soft click echoed, and Caleb lifted the hood, releasing a fresh wave of steam. Yep. The radiator was fried. "This'll intake a bit," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "How long?" she asked, crossing her arms. Caleb glanced at her. "Couple hours, give or take." She winced. "Great. You got somewhere to be?" She hesitated. "I had a meeting, but at this point, it doesn't matter anymore." Caleb sensed there was more to the story, but again he didn't pry. "You can wait inside," he offered. "There's AC, and I think we've still got some cold sodas in the fridge." The woman looked surprised, like she hadn't expected kindness. Then after a moment she nodded. "Thanks." Inside the garage's small office, the air conditioning hummed softly, a welcome contrast to the stifling summer heat. Caleb worked outside, methodical and efficient. Despite the car's high-end make, fixing it wasn't rocket science. Every now and then he caught the woman watching him through the glass window, not impatiently, not suspiciously, just watching. Finally, after an hour, she stepped outside, holding a soda can. "You always work this hard?" she asked, leaning against the garage door. Caleb didn't pause. "Someone's got to keep these cars running." "Not many mechanics would drop everything for a stranger," she pointed out. He glanced up, squinting slightly against the sun. "Not many strangers say thank you when you do." A small smile ghosted across her lips. Touché. For the first time since she had arrived, Caleb noticed something different in her expression. Beneath the poised exterior, there was weariness. She wasn't just frustrated about her car. She was carrying something heavy. "You from around here?" he asked, shifting the conversation. She shook her head. "No, just passing through." "Where you headed?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "Home, though honestly I don't even know where that is anymore." Something about the way she said it hit him deeper than it should have, but before he could ask, she straightened. "So, do you always help people for free, or am I just special?" Caleb chuckled. "Depends. You planning on making a habit of braking?" "Down near my garage?" She tilted her head, amused. "Maybe." By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb had finished the repairs. He wiped his hands on his rag and turned to the woman. "All set." She glanced at the car, then back at him. "That was fast." "Not my first time fixing a Phantom." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she said nothing. Reaching into her designer purse, she pulled out a sleek black wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Caleb shook his head. "Nothing." She frowned. "No, really, I can—" "It's fine," he interrupted. "It was just a busted radiator, no big deal." Her frown deepened. "It is to me." Caleb just shrugged. "Then pay it forward." For a long moment she didn't speak. She just looked at him as if trying to understand what kind of person would refuse. A blank check. Finally, she tucked her wallet back into her purse. "Thank you," she said softly. Caleb nodded. "Drive safe." She lingered for a second, as if about to say something else. But then she slipped into the car, the powerful engine purring to life beneath her hands, and just like that, she was gone. Caleb watched as the taillights disappeared down the road, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He didn't know her name. He didn't know that she would return. He didn't know that this one act of kindness would change his life forever. The days after the mysterious woman drove away were just like any other. Caleb spent his mornings under the hood of a car, his afternoons covered in grease, and his evenings sipping a cold beer on the worn-out couch in the garage's break room. Life in Maplewood was predictable, steady, comfortable, exactly how he liked it, but for some reason, he couldn't shake the memory of her. He didn't even know her name, just that she had green eyes that held too many secrets, and a voice that carried the kind of exhaustion only people with too much responsibility knew. He figured he'd never see her again. He was wrong. It was a Thursday afternoon, just past 3, when Caleb heard the familiar purr of an expensive engine outside the garage. He wiped his hands on a rag, stepping out into the sunlight, and there it was, the same midnight blue Sinclair Phantom. Only this time, there was no steam rising from the hood, no sign of distress. The woman had come back. She stepped out, dressed more casually this time, dark jeans, a fitted blazer over a simple blouse, but she still carried that same air of quiet confidence. "Back so soon?" Caleb asked, arching a brow. She smirked, leaning against the car. "Thought I'd drop by. You did fix my car, after all." Caleb crossed his arms. Did I? Or did you just want an excuse to come back? A flicker of amusement flashed across her face. Maybe a little of both. She extended a hand. Madeline Sinclair. Caleb blinked. He knew that name. Everyone did. His expression didn't change as he took her hand, his grip firm but not lingering. Caleb Reed. You knew, didn't you? She asked, tilting her head. Knew what? Who I was? Caleb shrugged. I figured it out. But it didn't really matter. She studied him for a moment. Most people would have treated me differently. Yeah, Caleb said, nodding. But I'm not most people. Madeline smiled. A real one, not the polite, guarded one she'd given him before. Maybe she had expected him to act differently. Maybe she was used to people seeing the CEO of Sinclair Motors, not just a woman with car trouble. But Caleb had never cared about money. He cared about character. Madeline walked around the garage, taking in the stacks of old tires, the faded posters. Of classic cars, the scent of oil and metal. You run this place? She asked. Caleb shook his head. Nah, just work here. It belongs to old man Harrison. Been here since I was a kid. She turned to him. You ever think about doing more? Caleb frowned. More? Yeah, a bigger shop, your own business. Maybe even something beyond this town. Caleb exhaled, rubbing his jaw. You sound like my mother. Madeline smirked. Smart woman. Too smart, Caleb muttered. Then he looked at her, skeptical. Why are you asking? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, so quick he almost missed it. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black envelope. I have an offer for you, she said, handing it over. Caleb took it, flipping it open. Inside was a formal job contract, not for a mechanic, but for a private vehicle specialist. Full-time position. Generous salary, relocation required. Caleb's stomach tightened. This is for Sinclair Motors, he said slowly. Madeline nodded. I need someone who knows cars. Someone honest. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth, even when I don't want to hear it, Caleb scoffed. And you think that's me? Madeline met his gaze. I know it is. Caleb leaned against the workbench, scanning the contract again. The money was absurd. He could pay off his mother's house. He could start his own shop, something he'd dreamed about for years, but never had the savings to do. But it also meant leaving everything behind. Madeline seemed to sense his hesitation. You don't have to answer now, she said. Take your time. Caleb exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Why me? Madeline tilted her head. Because you helped me when you didn't have to, and because you're damn good at what you do. Caleb huffed. Flattery won't make me say yes, she smirked. No, but maybe the chance to do something bigger will. She pulled out a card and handed it to him. My number's on there, she said. Think about it. Then, without waiting for a response, she slipped back into her car, the engine purring to life. Caleb watched as she drove away, his mind racing. This was the kind of opportunity people dreamed of, but dreams weren't always simple, and Caleb wasn't sure if leaving Maplewood was worth the price. That night, Caleb sat on the garage roof, a cold beer in hand, staring at the stars. The contract sat beside him, unopened since he'd left. The shop. He thought about his life here, the small-town routine, the people who relied on him. He thought about his mother, who had worked 2 jobs to make sure he never went without, and then he thought about Madeline. There was something about her that pulled at him. Not just her name, not just the offer. Something deeper, something he didn't quite understand yet. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a job. This was about who he was and who he wanted to be. As he took another sip of his beer, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd call her, not to accept, not to decline, but to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. And somehow, he had the feeling this was only the beginning. The ringing of the phone echoed in the quiet garage. Caleb sat on the edge of his workbench, tapping the business card between his fingers, staring at the numbers printed in crisp black ink. Madeline Sinclair. He'd spent the night tossing and turning her offer over in his mind like a puzzle he couldn't solve. On one hand, the job was an opportunity most people would kill for, a six-figure salary, access to the best cars in the world, and the chance to work for one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. On the other hand, it meant leaving behind everything he knew. Maplewood was home. The garage was home. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Caleb found himself wondering if staying put meant he was standing still. With a deep breath, he dialed. The phone rang. Twice before her voice came through, smooth and composed. "Madeline Sinclair." Caleb cleared his throat. "It's Caleb." A brief pause, then, "I was wondering when you'd call." 2 days later, Caleb found himself driving to Chicago, where Madeline had asked him to meet her at the Sinclair Motors headquarters. He hadn't signed anything yet, hadn't even agreed to the job, but he figured if he was going to make a decision, he needed to see what he was stepping into. The Sinclair Motors building was a towering glass and steel monolith, sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the oil-stained floors of Harrison's garage. Caleb stepped into the marble-floored lobby, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on him. He wasn't exactly dressed for Wall Street, jeans, work boots, and a leather jacket that had seen better days, but he didn't care. The receptionist looked hesitant but professional. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" "Yeah." "Tell Madeline Sinclair that Caleb Reed is here." Her expression shifted instantly. Recognition, surprise, a hint of curiosity. "Of course, right this way." Moments later, Caleb was led into a high-rise office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. And there she was, Madeline, standing near the window, her phone in hand, dressed in a fitted navy blazer and pencil skirt, exuding confidence. She turned, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually come." Caleb shrugged. "Figured I owed you a conversation before I said no." Her eyebrows lifted. "No?" He exhaled. "Madeline, I'm a small-town guy. I fix cars because I love it. I don't belong in—" He gestured around the sleek office. "Whatever this is." She studied him for a moment, then leaned against her desk. "So why did you come?" "Because something about this doesn't add up," Caleb admitted. "You could hire anyone, someone with a fancy degree, someone with a resume longer than my arm, but instead you showed up at my garage with a job offer. Why?" Madeline tilted her head slightly. "Do you always question people who want to pay you a ridiculous amount of money?" "Yeah," Caleb said without hesitation, "especially when it doesn't make sense." A flicker of something crossed her face. Amusement, maybe respect. Then finally, she sighed. "All right, Caleb, you want the truth?" He nodded. She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "I've spent my entire career surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. People who see a title before they see a person. You didn't care who I was. You helped me because it was the right thing to do." Caleb held her gaze. "That's not a reason to hire me." Madeline smiled. "No, but it's a reason to trust you." For the first time, something clicked. This wasn't just about fixing cars. This was about trust. Madeline wasn't looking for another corporate employee. She was looking for someone real, someone honest, someone who wouldn't let her drown in a world full of people who wanted something from her. Madeline turned, picking up a folder from her desk. "If the job I offered isn't what you want, maybe this will change your mind." She handed it to him. Caleb flipped it open, expecting another contract, another stack of legal jargon he had no interest in reading. Instead, he found blueprints, a custom garage, fully funded, in his name. Caleb's breath hitched. "What is this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. Madeline crossed her arms. "It's what I should have led with." "I don't." Just want to hire you, Caleb. I want to build something with you." He blinked. "You want to build a garage? For me? Not just a garage," she corrected. "A high-end auto restoration shop, custom builds, classic cars. Your dream, on your terms. I'll finance it, and you'll run it." Caleb's mind raced. This wasn't just some cushy job offer. This was his own. A business, a chance to do what he loved, but on a whole new level. He exhaled sharply. "You do realize this is insane, right?" Madeline smirked. "A little." "Why take this risk?" "Because I believe in good people," she said simply. "And I believe in you." For the first time since he walked into this building, Caleb felt something shift. In his chest, he had never met someone like Madeline Sinclair, and maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a risk at all. Maybe it was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Caleb stared down at the blueprints, the numbers, the possibilities. Then, finally, he looked up at Madeline. "I have one condition," she raised an eyebrow. "Which is, I don't work for you." He set the folder down. "I work with you." A slow smile spread across Madeline's lips. "Deal." They shook hands, and just like that, Caleb's life changed forever. The ink was barely dry on the agreement, but the weight of the decision had already settled into Caleb's chest. This wasn't just a job. It was a new life. Standing outside Sinclair Motors headquarters, the buzz of the city was a sharp contrast to the quiet rhythm of Maplewood, the towering skyline, the rush of traffic, the people moving with a sense of urgency. It all felt so foreign. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was this really the right choice? But then he thought of the garage, the one Madeline had promised to help him build, a place where he could create something real, where his skills actually mattered. He'd spent years fixing cars for people who couldn't afford to pay him. Now, for the first time, someone believed in him enough to invest in his future. That meant something, and he wasn't going to waste it. The next morning, Madeline picked him up in a sleek black Bentley, the kind of car that looked completely out of place in Maplewood, but fit her like a glove. Caleb slid into the passenger seat, trying not to feel out of place. "So," he said, glancing at her as she maneuvered through the city traffic with ease, "where exactly are we going?" Madeline smirked. "To your future." Caleb exhaled. Cryptic. She didn't elaborate, just kept driving until the city faded behind them, and they reached the industrial outskirts. Finally, she pulled up to an empty lot, surrounded by warehouses and old manufacturing buildings. Caleb stepped out, squinting against the sunlight. "This it?" Madeline nodded. "It doesn't look like much now, but give it some time." He turned in a slow circle, trying to picture it. His own garage, his own business, a place built on his terms, with his values. It was surreal. Madeline studied his expression. "What do you think?" Caleb let out a slow breath. "I think I'm going to need a hell of a lot of tools." She laughed, a genuine, full-bodied laugh, not the polite chuckle he'd heard before. It suited her. "We'll get you whatever you need," she promised. And somehow Caleb believed her. Of course, nothing was ever that easy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and late-night discussions with architects and contractors. Caleb had always been hands-on, but this was an entirely different ballgame. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was making decisions that would shape an entire business. Madeline was there every step of the way. She wasn't just writing checks and stepping back. She was in it with him. Late nights at her office, debating floor plans, early mornings on site, reviewing blueprints. She challenged him, pushed him to think bigger, and for the first time in his life, Caleb started to see himself as more than just the guy under the hood. He was building something real, something that mattered, and that scared him more than anything. One night, After another long day at the site, Caleb found himself back on the rooftop of the garage, his old ritual. A cold beer in hand, the city skyline stretching in front of him. He let the silence settle. Then he heard footsteps. Madeline. She had a way of finding him, even when he didn't ask to be found. "You're quiet," she observed, taking a seat beside him. Caleb sighed. "Just thinking." "About?" He ran a hand through his hair. "All of this. What if I mess it up?" Madeline tilted her head. "Why would you?" "Because I don't know what the hell I'm doing," he admitted. "I fix cars, Maddie. I don't run businesses." She didn't flinch at his honesty. Instead, she smiled. "You didn't know how to fix that phantom either, and yet here we are." Caleb chuckled. "That's different." "No, it's not." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You're good at this, Caleb. You just don't see it yet." Something in her voice made his chest tighten. She believed in him, and for the first time in a long time, he wanted to believe in himself, too. The weeks turned into months, and the garage started to take shape. It wasn't just a blueprint anymore. It was real. And so was the way Caleb started to see Madeline differently. She wasn't just a CEO. She was someone who worked harder than anyone he'd ever met. Someone who didn't take shortcuts. Someone who, despite having the world at her feet, still showed up at a dusty construction site every morning just to make sure this project didn't fail. And somewhere along the way, their conversation stopped, being just about work. One night they were eating takeout in her office, papers scattered around them, when Caleb caught her staring at him. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" Madeline hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. He could feel it, and suddenly he realized maybe this wasn't just about a garage. Maybe it never had been. One evening, after another long day, Caleb found Madeline still at the site, reviewing plans even though the crew had already gone home. She looked exhausted, and for the first time, Caleb did something he hadn't done before. He reached out. "Come on," he said, grabbing her hand. Madeline blinked. "Where are we going?" "Nowhere," Caleb said. "Just away from blueprints for 5 minutes." She hesitated, then let him pull her. Outside, the air was crisp, the city lights glowing in the distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb glanced at her, a small smirk on his lips. "You ever slow down?" Madeline sighed. "Not really." "Figured." She turned to him, her green eyes searching his face. "Why did you say yes?" Caleb exhaled. "Because, for the first time, someone actually thought I was worth investing in." Madeline's gaze softened. "You are." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and in that moment, something shifted. Neither of them said it. Neither of them needed to, because some things didn't need to be spoken to be real. The garage was finally taking shape. What had once been just a blueprint, an abstract idea on paper, was now brick and metal, bolts and beams. The sign had yet to be put up, but Caleb could already picture it. Reed's Custom Garage, right there. In bold letters, it was his, built with his hands, with his vision. And Madeline, she was there for every step of the process. Every late-night discussion, every tough decision, every moment when doubt crept in. She was more than just a financial backer. She was in this with him, and somewhere along the way, Caleb had stopped seeing her as just a CEO. He wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe it was the way she refused to stay in her pristine office, choosing instead to roll up her sleeves and work alongside him. Or maybe it was how she challenged him, pushed him to dream bigger, to think beyond what he thought was possible. Or maybe it was just her, the woman who had 1,000 responsibilities, yet always made time for him, the woman who had the world at her feet, but still stood beside him on a dusty construction site, eating cheap takeout and laughing at his dumb jokes. He told himself it didn't matter, that this was just business, but business didn't make his chest tighten when she looked at him like that. The team had been working non-stop for weeks, and tonight was a well-earned break. Madeline had insisted on taking the entire crew out for drinks, a gesture that surprised everyone, including Caleb. So here they were at O'Reilly's pub, the closest thing Maplewood had to a real bar. It was loud, packed, the air thick with music and laughter. Caleb leaned against the bar, watching as Madeline effortlessly charmed his crew, laughing with them like she had been part of the team forever. She was wearing jeans tonight, paired with a fitted leather jacket, a stark contrast to the polished executive he first met, and damn if it didn't suit her. "She fits in well," a voice said beside him. Caleb turned to see Rick, one of the older mechanics he had worked with for years. "Yeah," Caleb muttered. "She does," Rick smirked. "You know she's got eyes for you, right?" Caleb nearly choked on his beer. "What?" Rick chuckled. "Come on, kid. I've been around long enough to recognize the look a woman gives when she's interested. And that one—" He nodded toward Madeline, who was talking animatedly with the crew. "She only lights up like that when she's looking at you," Caleb scoffed. "She's my business partner." "Uh-huh. And I'm the Pope." Caleb shook his head, but Rick's words stuck with him, because deep down he had been thinking the same damn thing. The night stretched on, and at some point the music changed. Someone had started playing old rock ballads, and the crowd on the dance floor had thinned to just a few couples swaying under the dim lights. Caleb was content nursing his drink, watching from the sidelines, until he felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. Madeline. She tilted her head toward the dance floor. "Come on!" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You want to dance?" "Consider it part of the celebration," she teased. "Besides, you owe me." "I paid for the drinks," Caleb huffed. "Fine, one dance." She smiled, that smile that made his stomach do things it really shouldn't, and led him to the floor. The music was slow, easy, and Caleb suddenly felt very aware of how close she was. Her hand fit into his, like it belonged there. Her other hand rested lightly on his shoulder, her touch warm through his shirt. They moved in sync, swaying to the rhythm, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the world had faded away. Caleb swallowed. "You dance with all your business partners? Or am I just special?" Madeline smirked. "Only the ones who turn down a six-figure job but accept a construction project instead." Caleb chuckled. "Guess that makes me one of a kind." Her gaze softened. "Yeah, it does." The way she said it made his chest tighten. Caleb had never been one for grand romantic gestures. But in that moment, with the dim lights casting a soft glow on her face, with her body close to his, he wanted to kiss her more than he wanted to breathe. But he didn't, because this was business. Right? The song ended, but neither of them stepped away immediately. Then finally Madeline cleared her throat, dropping her hands. "We should probably call it a night." "Yeah," Caleb said, though a part of him didn't want to let go. Madeline hesitated, then gave him a small smile before slipping away. And just like that, the moment was gone. The next morning, Caleb walked into the garage, expecting things to go back to normal. But the second he saw Madeline standing by the blueprints with a cup of coffee in hand, his mind flashed back to last night, the way she had felt in his arms, the way she had looked at him. Madeline glanced up, and for a split second something unreadable passed through her expression, like she had been thinking the same thing. Then she straightened. "We need to finalize the equipment orders today. I want to make sure we're on schedule." "Back to business," Caleb exhaled. "Right, let's do it." And just like that, the line was drawn again. But for how much longer? The days after that dance felt like walking a tightrope. For weeks, Caleb had been focused on building something real. His garage, his business, his future. And Madeline, she had been right there with him, pushing him, believing in him in a way no one ever had before. But now there was something else in the air, something unspoken, heavy, impossible to ignore. The way her eyes lingered a second too long when she looked at him, the way his pulse picked up every time she stepped just a little too close. They were balancing between what they were and what they could be, and Caleb wasn't sure how much longer they could pretend the line hadn't already been crossed. Construction was finally nearing completion. The garage was no longer just an idea. It was a reality. The walls were up. The floors were polished concrete, tough enough to withstand a lifetime of grease and tires. The equipment was arriving in waves, brand new lifts, custom tools, diagnostic machines so advanced that Caleb wasn't sure he even needed half of them. It was everything he had ever wanted. And yet, something was off. Caleb wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out onto the lot, watching the sun dip lower over the city skyline. He should be feeling relieved, excited, proud. But all he could think about was how soon this phase would be over, and what that meant for him and Madeline. Would she stay involved? Or was this just a project for her, something to prove she could build something from the ground up? Would she leave? The thoughts sat like a weight in his chest, and the worst part, he had no damn clue how to ask her. That evening, Madeline arrived at the garage later than usual. She was still dressed in her work clothes, a sharp navy dress and heels that didn't belong anywhere near an auto shop, but Caleb had gotten used to seeing her like this, half in her world, half in his. "You're late," he teased as she walked toward him. Madeline sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Board meeting ran over. I swear, some of these people just like to hear themselves talk." Caleb smirked. "I could say the same thing about certain CEOs." She shot him a glare, but it lacked any real heat. "Watch it, Reed," he chuckled, leaning against one of the workbenches. "So, what brings you by? Thought you'd be celebrating now that this place is almost done." Madeline hesitated, and there it was again, that shift in her expression, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally, she exhaled. "I just wanted to see it. One last time before it's finished. Something about the way—" She said it hit him harder than it should have. "One last time," he repeated. Madeline glanced away, her jaw tightening. "Damn it!" Caleb's stomach clenched. "You're leaving, aren't you?" She looked back at him, startled. "What? This was always just a project for you," he said, voice quieter now. "Once the garage is open, you're moving on." Madeline didn't answer right away, and that silence, it told him everything. Caleb clenched his fists. He wasn't angry, not at her, not really. He had known this was a possibility, but knowing it and hearing it confirmed were two very different things. "I never said I was leaving," Madeline said softly. "But you never said you were staying either." She bit her lip. "Caleb, just tell me." "The truth, Maddie," he said, stepping closer. "Is this just business to you?" She met his gaze then, and for the first time, he saw it. The fear beneath the confidence, the hesitation beneath the control. "This was never just business," she admitted, and just like that, the tightrope they had been balancing on snapped. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with something unspoken, but undeniable. Then Caleb took the final step forward, closing the space between them. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. Madeline didn't. Instead, she tilted her head up, her breath uneven, her lips parting just slightly, and that was all it took. Caleb reached up, cupping her face with rough, calloused hands, and kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't tentative. It was everything that had been building between them for weeks, months, maybe since the day she walked into his garage with a busted radiator and too many walls around her heart. Madeline kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer like she had been waiting for this moment as long as he had. By the time they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Madeline let out a shaky laugh. "That was overdue." Caleb smirked, just a little. She traced a hand down his chest, her expression softening. "What happens now?" Caleb exhaled, pressing his forehead against hers. "Now?" He smiled. "Now we figure this out. Together." And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the future anymore. The first thing Caleb noticed when he woke up the next morning was the silence. Not the kind of silence that felt peaceful, like the quiet hum of an engine running smoothly. No, this was the kind of silence that came before something broke. Madeline was already gone. The spot beside him was cold, the sheets barely disturbed, as if she had slipped away long before dawn. Caleb sat up, rubbing a hand over his face. What the hell did that mean? Last night had been real. He knew it. He had felt it. But had she? A part of him wanted to believe she had just needed time. That maybe waking up next to him had been overwhelming. That maybe this thing between them was bigger than either of them had expected. But another part of him, the part that had been burned before, whispered something darker. Maybe it hadn't meant the same thing to her. Caleb didn't hear from Madeline for 2 days, which was 2 days too long. They had gone from working side by side every single day to radio silence. No texts, no calls, nothing. And Caleb was not a man who played games, so on the 3rd morning he drove to Sinclair Motors. It was a bold move, sure. He didn't exactly fit into her world, rolling up in his beat-up truck, his jeans still stained, from oil, but he didn't care. This wasn't about business anymore. He walked straight through the front doors, ignoring the way the receptionist stiffened at the sight of him. "Caleb Reed for Madeline Sinclair," he said, voice firm. The woman behind the desk looked hesitant. "Miss Sinclair is in a meeting, then I'll wait." The receptionist opened her mouth to protest, but Caleb had already stepped aside, arms crossed over his chest, making it clear he wasn't leaving. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and there she was. Madeline froze the moment she saw him, her usual poised expression flickering into something else, guilt, surprise, something unspoken. Caleb exhaled sharply. "We need to talk." Madeline's jaw tightened. She glanced at the executives walking out behind her, then gave him a small nod. "My office, now." The second the office door shut behind them, Caleb didn't waste any time. "You just disappeared," he said, voice low but firm. Madeline sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I didn't disappear. I've been working," Caleb scoffed. "That's not an excuse, Maddie. We don't do this, whatever this is." She pressed her lips together. "I needed space." "Space," Caleb repeated, nodding slowly. "Right, because that's what people do after they spend the night together for the first time, right? They just vanish." Madeline's expression flickered just for a second. "It wasn't just the night, Caleb, it's everything." "Then talk to me," he said, stepping closer, "because I'm standing here trying to figure out if I just imagined. What happened between us?" "You didn't," she whispered. Caleb exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening just slightly. "Then what's the problem?" Madeline hesitated. Then, finally, she looked at him. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, voice quiet. Caleb frowned. "Do what?" "This." She gestured between them. "I don't know how to be with someone when I'm used to always being in control. I don't know how to separate what I feel from what I've built." Caleb let that sink in. He had known she carried weight, the pressure of an empire, the expectations of a boardroom full of men who waited for her to slip up. But he hadn't realized how much she had been holding herself back. "You don't have to separate it," he said, his voice gentler now. "You just have to let yourself want something for once." Madeline swallowed. "And what if I don't know how?" Caleb's lips twitched. "Then I guess we figure it out." For a moment she just stared at him. Then finally she sighed. "This is new for me." "It's new for me too, Maddie." She let out a small, shaky laugh. "You sure about that? You seem like a guy who knows exactly what he wants." Caleb tilted his head. I do. And what do you want? He didn't hesitate. You. Her. Breath hitched. Caleb stepped closer, cupping her face. But not if you're gonna keep running every time this gets real. Madeline closed her eyes, exhaling. I don't want to run. Good, Caleb murmured, because I'm not going anywhere. And then he kissed her. This time, it wasn't about months of built-up tension or stolen moments. This was about choosing something real. And Madeline? This time, she didn't pull away. The moment Madeline stopped running, everything changed. She and Caleb weren't just business partners anymore. They weren't just dancing around the tension, pretending it wasn't there. They were in this, together. But love had never been the problem. The problem was everything else. Caleb had spent his whole life doing things his own way. He worked with his hands. He built things from the ground up. He never had to answer to anyone but himself. Madeline, on the other hand, lived in a world of control. Her entire life had been about making sure everything went exactly as planned. Because if she made one wrong move, there were 100 men in expensive suits waiting to take her place. So now they were learning how to exist in each other's worlds. It started with something small. Caleb was in the garage, going over the final touches before the grand opening, when Madeline walked in, holding a thick folder of documents. He glanced, up from under the hood of a classic '69 Mustang, wiping grease from his hands. You look stressed, he noted. Madeline sighed. I need to talk to you about the contract for the shop's licensing agreement. Caleb frowned. We already signed everything, didn't we? She hesitated. Yes, but I think we need to go over the profit structure again. Caleb's shoulders tensed. Maddie, we agreed on this months ago. Why are we changing things now? Because I want to make sure everything is set up to scale the business in the future, she explained. You're starting small, but in a year we could be looking at expansion, maybe even multiple locations. Caleb let out a low exhale, setting down his wrench. Expansion? Maddie, I just want to fix cars. I'm not trying to build some giant auto empire. Madeline pursed her lips. I know that, but don't you at least want to think about it? This could be bigger than just one garage. And maybe that's the problem, Caleb said, crossing his arms. You always want bigger. You always need a plan. Can't we just enjoy what we have right now? Madeline's jaw tightened. I don't know how to do that. The words hit him harder than they should have, because suddenly he saw it, the way she was wired. Madeline Sinclair didn't know how to slow down. She had spent her whole life fighting to stay ahead, never letting herself breathe, never allowing herself to just exist in the moment. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, sighing. Maddie, I love what we're building. But I don't want to lose myself in it, and I don't want you to either. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded slowly. You're right, she admitted. I don't know how to turn my brain off sometimes, Caleb smirked. Lucky for you, I happen to be an expert at doing nothing. Madeline let out a small laugh. I'm sure you are. Come on, he said, reaching for her hand. Let's get out of here. Madeline raised an eyebrow. Where are we going? Caleb grinned. For once? Nowhere important. Caleb drove them out of the city, down the winding roads that led to the outskirts of Maplewood, where the stars were brighter and the air smelled like pine and gasoline. They ended up at a little roadside diner, the kind with red vinyl booths and a jukebox playing old country songs. Madeline looked around, amused. Let me guess. Best burgers in town? Caleb smirked. You joke, but just wait. They slid into a booth, and for the first time in weeks, Madeline looked relaxed. She wasn't checking her phone. She wasn't thinking about profit margins or licensing agreements. She was just here. With him, and for Caleb, that was enough. Halfway, Through their burgers, Madeline set down her napkin and looked at him carefully. "You know," she said, "I never actually asked you why you turned down my first job offer." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I thought you figured that out by now." "Humor me." He sighed, leaning back. "Because I didn't want to be another guy working. And for you, I didn't want to be replaceable." Madeline frowned. "You think I replace people easily?" "I think people like me don't last long in your world," he admitted. Madeline went quiet. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "I don't want you in my world, Caleb. I want to be in yours." The words sent a sharp heat through his chest. Because this was real. More real than any contract. More real than any business deal. And Caleb knew right then, right there, that he had already fallen for her. The morning after their roadside diner confession, everything felt lighter. For the first time since this whole thing started, Madeline wasn't running. She had told Caleb the truth, that she wanted to be in his world, not the other way around. And once the words were out, there was no taking them back. The problem was, reality had a way of creeping back in. And the moment she stepped into her office that morning, she was reminded of exactly why she had spent her whole life keeping people at arm's length. "Madeline, this is unacceptable." The voice of Gerald Whitmore, one of Sinclair Motors' most senior board members, cut through the conference room like a blade. Madeline sat at the head of the long glass conference table, her fingers interlocked, her face a careful mask of control. "Would you care to elaborate?" she asked, keeping her voice even. Gerald scoffed. "Your priorities have clearly shifted. You've poured millions into an independent garage, something that has nothing to do with Sinclair Motors, and now we hear rumors that you've been personally involved with one of the mechanics." Madeline's jaw tightened. Here it was. She had known this moment would come. She knew they would start questioning her, doubting her, waiting for a reason to push her out. She just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "Reed's Garage is a personal investment," she said coolly. "Not a Sinclair Motors project. What I do with my own money is none of the board's concern." Gerald leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "That's where you're wrong. Everything you do reflects on this company. Your image is part of Sinclair's success, and right now you're sending a message that you're distracted." A ripple of murmurs spread across the table. Madeline's impulse spiked, but she didn't let it show. She refused to show weakness. "So tell me, Gerald," she said, tilting her head, "if I were a man investing in an auto shop, would we be having this conversation?" Silence. She had him there, and they all knew it. Gerald's expression darkened. "You can deflect all you want, Madeline, but at the end of the day we need to know where your priorities lie. Because if we start to feel that Sinclair Motors is no longer your main focus." He let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. Madeline clenched her fists beneath the table. They were testing her, pushing her, waiting to see if she would crack. And for the first time, she felt genuinely afraid, because she had spent years fighting to prove she was worthy of this seat, that she could run this company better than anyone else. But now she had something else to lose. Someone else to lose. She showed up at the garage that night exhausted. The day had drained her, stripped her down to raw nerves and simmering frustration. The second Caleb saw her, he knew something was wrong. He didn't say anything at first, just wiped the grease off his hands and walked over to her, eyes searching her face. "Rough day?" he asked. Madeline let out a humorless laugh. "That obvious?" Caleb nodded. She sighed. "I got called into a board meeting this morning. Apparently my personal life is now their concern." Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" Madeline swallowed hard. "They think I'm distracted, that I'm too focused on this." She gestured vaguely around them. "On you." Caleb's expression didn't change. He just crossed his arms, watching her carefully. "And what do you think?" he asked. Madeline hesitated. She knew what she wanted to say, that she didn't care what the board thought, that nothing would change, that they couldn't control her. But that wasn't the whole truth. Because the truth was, she had worked too. Hard to let them push her out now. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened. So what happens now? Madeline looked down, her stomach twisting. I don't know, she repeated. Caleb exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. You're afraid, he said after a long moment. Madeline's head snapped up. I'm not. Yeah, you are, he interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. You're afraid of what it means if you choose this. Madeline's heart pounded, because he wasn't wrong. She was terrified, because if she chose this, if she chose him, and it all fell apart, she wouldn't just lose Caleb. She might lose everything, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to risk it. Caleb ran a hand down his face. Look, Maddie, I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you worked for, but I also can't be something you have to hide. Her breath caught. I'm not hiding you. Aren't you? Silence. Because the truth was, she was hiding him. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not forever, but she had been keeping him separate from her world, and he deserved better than that. You don't have to decide anything right now, Caleb said, softer this time. But you do need to figure out what you want, because I'm not going to be your secret, Maddie. And with that, he turned and walked back into the garage, leaving her standing there, alone with the truth she had been avoiding. Madeline drove home that night, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. She had never been this scared before, not when she first took over Sinclair Motors, not when she faced rooms full of men who doubted her every move. But this was different, because if she fought for Sinclair Motors, if she lost that battle, she could recover, she could rebuild. But if she lost Caleb, she wasn't sure she'd ever be the same again, and maybe that meant he was worth fighting for. Madeline had spent her life choosing battles carefully. She had fought to prove herself in the corporate world. She had fought to keep Sinclair Motors at the top. She had fought against every expectation, every assumption, every whisper that she was just a woman playing in a man's game. But this was different. This wasn't about power or legacy. This was about love, and for the first time, she was terrified she might lose. Madeline spent the next 24 hours locked in her office, formulating a plan. She wasn't just going to let the board decide her future for her, and she sure as hell wasn't going to let them decide who she was allowed to love. So when she finally picked up the phone to call Caleb, her voice was steady, determined. "Meet me at the garage," she said. "We need to talk." A pause, then, "On my way." By the time Caleb arrived, Madeline was already there, standing outside the garage, with papers in hand, her face unreadable. The second he stepped out of his truck, Caleb's eyes locked onto hers, searching. "You figured it out," he said simply. Madeline nodded. "Yeah, I did." She handed him the documents. Caleb frowned, flipping through the pages, his brows furrowed. "This is a partnership agreement," she finished for him. 50-50 ownership. Your name is on the deed, Caleb. The garage belongs to both of us now." Caleb's breath hitched. "You did this without telling me?" Madeline held his gaze. "Because I needed to make the decision on my own, and I needed you to know that this isn't just a project to me. It's not just business. It's you." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Maddie, this is a risk," she interrupted, a small smile playing at her lips. "Yeah, it is. But for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that." Silence. Then Caleb took a step closer. You sure?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Madeline nodded. "Yes," and just like that, the weight between them lifted. Caleb let out a breath, half a laugh, half disbelief. "Well, damn," he muttered. "Guess that means we're stuck with each other now." Madeline smirked. "Guess so." And then he kissed her, this time. It wasn't about hesitation or second-guessing. It was about certainty. It was about finally choosing something. Choosing each other. The next morning, Madeline walked into the boardroom with fire in her veins. The men at the table straightened. Sensing the shift in her energy, she took her seat at the head, folding her hands neatly. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth, "I believe there was some concern about where my priorities lie." Gerald Whitmore cleared his throat, already preparing for an argument. "Madeline, Let me stop you there," she interrupted, her smile sharp. "Sinclair Motors has had its most profitable quarter in 5 years. We've expanded into 2 new markets, secured a partnership with one of the leading electric vehicle manufacturers, and increased shareholder value by 12%. She leaned forward. "Now, if any of you still believe that my personal life is a distraction, I'd advise you to take a long, hard look at those numbers before embarrassing yourselves further." Silence. No one spoke, because she was right, and they all knew it. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "We were simply concerned about my personal investments are not up for debate," she said firmly. "And I will not apologize for the fact that I refuse to sacrifice my personal happiness for the sake of optics." The air was thick with tension, but no one dared challenge her. She had won, and she had never felt freer. That night, she met Caleb back at the garage. He was leaning against the hood of a newly restored classic Camaro, arms crossed, watching her approach. "You survive," he teased. Madeline smirked. "Crushed them." Caleb chuckled. "Knew you would." She exhaled, stepping closer. "It's done, Caleb. I don't have to hide anything anymore. I don't want to." Caleb tilted his head. "So, does this mean I can finally take you on a real date without worrying about scandalizing half of corporate America?" Madeline laughed. "Yes, though fair warning, I have very expensive taste." Caleb smirked. Yeah. Lucky for you, I just happen to be co-owner of a very successful garage." She raised an eyebrow. "Successful? We haven't even opened yet." Caleb grinned. "Yeah, but with you by my side, I'd bet on us every time." And for the first time in a long time, Madeline knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, with him, with this life they were building together, and she wouldn't change. A damn thing. The grand opening of Reed's Custom Garage was supposed to be a small event. A few friends, some local clients, nothing too extravagant. At least that's what Caleb had planned. Instead, when he pulled up that morning, the lot was already packed. Rows of classic cars, custom builds, and even a few luxury models lined the streets. People from all over had come. Some were former clients from the old Maplewood garage, the ones who had trusted him with their cars before he ever had a fancy building. Some were Sinclair Motors executives showing up to support Madeline, not just because she was their CEO, but because they had finally seen what she was capable of. And then there was the press. Caleb wasn't exactly thrilled about that part, but as Madeline stepped out of her car, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket instead of her usual boardroom attire, she just smirked. "You didn't really think we could keep this quiet, did you?" she teased. Caleb exhaled, shaking his head. "Maddie, this isn't exactly my scene," she laughed, looping her arm through his. "It's your garage, Reed. It's whatever you want it to be." And with that, she kissed him right there in front of everyone. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and for the first time, Caleb didn't care who was watching. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't just fixing cars, he was building a future. With her. The event was more than just a grand opening. It was a celebration of everything they had built together. The garage gleamed under the afternoon sun. Brand new, fully stocked, the dream Caleb never thought he'd have. But the best part? It still felt like home. The smell of motor oil and fresh paint, the sound of engines revving, the easy laughter of mechanics who weren't just employees but friends. Caleb walked through the shop, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, but his eyes kept drifting to Madeline. She was in the center of it all, smiling, laughing, completely at ease. She wasn't just the CEO of Sinclair Motors today. She was just Maddie, his Maddie. And when their eyes met across the crowd, he knew. She felt it too. By the time the crowd had thinned out and the sun had dipped below the horizon, Caleb found Madeline standing out back, leaning against the hood of an old '67 Mustang. He walked up beside her, hands in his pockets. "Big day," he said. Madeline smiled. "Bigger than I expected. You regret it?" She turned to him, her eyes soft. "Not for a second." Caleb nodded, exhaling slowly. "Good, because I meant what I said before, Maddie. I'd bet on us every time." She studied him for a long moment, then reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'd bet on us too," she whispered. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was comfortable, steady, right. Then, after a moment, Madeline smirked. "You know," she mused, "you never actually took me on that real date you promised." Caleb chuckled. "You call this not real?" He gestured to the garage. "This is the best first date I've ever planned." Madeline rolled her eyes, shoving his shoulder. "Come on, Reed. I want dinner and wine and a date where I don't smell like motor oil." Caleb grinned. All right, you want fancy?" Madeline raised an eyebrow. "You got something better?" He smirked. "Yeah, I do." And then, without another word, he lifted her up, setting her down right in the driver's seat of the Mustang. Madeline's eyes widened. "Wait, are we stealing this car?" Caleb laughed. "It's mine, Sinclair. Consider it part of the business perks." He slid into the passenger seat, reaching over to turn the key. The engine roared to life, the familiar hum filling the night air. Madeline glanced at him, excitement flickering in her eyes. "So where are we going?" Caleb just smirked. "Nowhere important," he said, and with that she hit the gas. The Mustang sped off into the night, leaving behind the garage, the city, the expectations, everything but each other. Because some things in life weren't about where you were going. They were about who you had beside you when you got there. And for Caleb and Madeline, that was all they needed. And that's the story of Caleb and Madeline. Proof that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming tale. We bring you stories of love, fate, and second chances, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. And if this story touched your heart, give it a like and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Thank you for watching. And until next time, keep believing in love, kindness, and the unexpected magic of life. See you in the next story.